Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review comes from 1980. It's Hide in Plain Sight, starring James Caan and directed by James Caan. This is the only film that James Caan ever directed, and it's an interesting film. Like I said, made in 1980, it feels like a 70s film. Probably shot in 1979. It's based on a true story. It's set in the wonderful city of Buffalo in 1967. So, not New York, but Buffalo, good blue collar working class town. Home of the Bills, of course. And this is James Caan, a slightly different character than he usually plays. He is playing a working stiff in this film, a working schmo who is separated from his wife or divorced from his wife, but he has two kids that he still sees, even though he ends up just being a babysitter for his ex-wife and her new boyfriend. And her new boyfriend is a very low on the rung mafia wannabe. There's a scene where James Caan's babysitting, and the two of them go to a party hosted by some mafia don played by a familiar face, and he's trying to introduce himself to all the important people, and they obviously don't think that much of him. So he's kind of trying to impress the mafia members. So he does an armed robbery, but the mafia aren't actually that impressed by it. And he, under the kind of advice of one of the mafioso, he then marries his girlfriend, James Caan's ex-wife, to give the impression to the police that he's a married man and he won't get as much in prison. They didn't really ask him to do the job, he just did it off his own bat to try and impress them. So it ends up that they don't provide any help that they promise, and he ends up turning to the witness protection program, which I'm guessing in 1967 was at the start of that. And with the help of cop Kenneth McMillan, Baron Harkonnen himself, and lawyer Joseph Summer, one day James Caan's ex-wife and his kids just disappear. He's coming to pick them up for a day out, and of course they just vanish. And he tries to go to the police. The police don't want anything to do with it. He tries to badger Kenneth McMillan's character. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He files a missing persons report. That goes nowhere. And they end up, him and his new girlfriend, school teacher, Jill Eckenberry, who later becomes pregnant with James Caan's child. They end up hiring lawyer Danny Aiello to fight the court. They end up going to Washington and meet a congressman who is of course no use to anybody, until James Caan takes the matters into his own hands to try and get his children back. So it's a really interesting story. I'm actually surprised it hasn't been remade, but I don't know whether the witness protection rules have kind of changed, as far as, I guess people, their fathers or mothers from a previous marriage probably can't know where their children are. but it kind of brings up that moral question of, you are protecting a criminal, but then you're neglecting children's natural parents to actually know where they are or how they are or whether they're still alive or anything. So it's a different kind of role for James Caan. It actually works quite well as a nice double bill with The Gambler, where he's not playing his usual hard man. He plays, like I say, he works in a factory. At one point he gets laid off. They struggle to pay the lawyer bills. He gets more and more frustrated. There's a wonderful scene in the employment office where he's been standing in a queue for 3 hours to try and get seen, but it ends up he's been in the wrong queue, and of course the teller won't help him. He has to go and stand in another. So his frustration just builds and builds as he just gets brick wall after brick wall to try and get his kids back, before, like I say, kind of takes into his own hands to try and get his kids back. Like I say, based on a true story. The scumbag who replaces Caan as the surrogate father of the kids, he doesn't treat Caan's ex-wife very well. He ended up actually being taken on by the authorities as an undercover agent. The 12 guys that his testimony got convicted by the making of the film in 1980, they were all out by that point. And the lawsuit that James Caan's character raised against the US government at the time of the release of the film in 1980, that was still ongoing. It's just an interesting, wonderful little film. Again, the fact that it's only a film directed by Caan, he actually does a really good job. There's a nice scene where he goes to pick up the kids for the day out, and then the house is completely empty. Caan does that tracking shot outside the house, and it follows Caan inside the house, which is kind of reminiscent of that shot Sergio Leone does in Once Upon a Time in the West, tracking along the railway coaches as a character walks through the inside. There's another nice scene where Caan's ex-wife tells him that the guy, they've got married the day before, and instead of what a lot of directors might do, go in for close-ups, Caan just kind of pulls the camera back slowly and across the road and leaves a distance between them, as Caan is obviously surprised by this news. It's a really well-paced film. It's really well acted. Caan kind of... There's a couple of moments where he has outbursts, but he's actually pretty reserved, and it's one of his better performances. Again, if you watch this with The Gambler, it's perhaps a completely different James Caan. Again, obviously he was in The Godfather, but this view of the mafia is somewhat different. They're just kind of low-level kind of scumbags. There's no glamour to it whatsoever. His kind of courtship and relationship with Jill Eckenberry as a school teacher is nicely done. And again, there's a nice world building of living in Buffalo and working in Buffalo and that kind of working class environment. For trivia buffs, there's two members of John Carpenter's Thing in the film, Bennings and Palmer. Bennings has one scene as a reporter that Danny Aiello suggests should write about James Caan's character, and Palmer is a kind of smug lawyer employed by the government at the first stage of when Danny Aiello initially wants to raise the case. Palmer is a smug lawyer who kind of stops that. Obviously this was before he went to the Antarctic and smoked lots of weed and became a helicopter pilot. So that's interesting. Well cast, well acted. Again, I'm not sure why Caan didn't direct again. I mean, obviously this wouldn't be a hit, but who knows with bigger stars. I mean, Caan by 1980, I'm not really sure where his box office was at that point. But this could have easily starred Robert Redford, and it might have been a bigger hit by that time. And like I say, I'm surprised it has been remade, because it is an interesting story. Again, I don't know whether, I'm obviously not an expert, but I'm guessing in those kind of cases the mother usually wins out in custody of the kids. But again, it's, are you endangering the kids by putting them in protective custody, and would they actually be safer with their natural father or mother, whichever one isn't involved with the criminal in witness protection? And obviously, as the film goes on, the mafia want to find the character who ratted them out as well. And there's a nice scene where Caan is being tailed by somebody, and there's a nice little scene with a conversation with the person who's tailing him. It's just a well put together film. Like I say, it's really well shot. It's a tight film as well. I'm not actually sure what the running time is, but it's not much more than about an hour and a half. And again, you are on his side, because like he is playing quote unquote a normal person, which James Caan obviously didn't do all the time. And you do understand his frustrations with a system that just refuses to give him any information whatsoever. Because again, it's hinted at as kind of the beginnings of the witness protection program, and they don't want to look bad, and they don't want to have like a new system up and running and then immediately give up where that person is staying and making a new life under new names. So it's a really interesting little film. Like I said, very enjoyable, well done all round. Obviously this is on the DVD, but it's a Warner Archive, so who knows, there might be a Warner Archive Blu-ray release at some point. It's definitely worth a release, apart from anything else, the novelty of the only film James Caan directed. So that's Hide in Plain Sight. Please let me know in the comments if you've seen it and what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitude Ronin from Solitude Ronin Films, saying farewell.